welcome, and thanks for joining us for Jumpstart's last State of AI webinar of 2024. I'm Lauren Smith-Petta, and I serve as Jumpstart's Director of Education. With the landscape of AI in such a rapidly evolving state, these quarterly sessions are focused on the highlights and headlines of AI, what you need to know in about 30 to 40 minutes, and how to successfully and ethically apply these tools and principles to your businesses today. Jumpstart offers another webinar series on a different topic every month, along with a variety of other educational programs and events. Visit jumpstartinc.org/smallbiz to explore our services. Before I introduce our presenter today, a few obligatory housekeeping items. This presentation session is a mere 30 to 40 minutes. The remaining time will be set aside for the Q&A portion with an end time of 12:30. In your toolbar, you should be able to see an important communication tool at your disposal today, the Q&A. You can put your questions in the Q&A as they occur to you, and Brad will address them when appropriate or at the end. At the end of today's session and in a follow-up email, you'll receive a brief survey. We appreciate your feedback as it allows us to continue to bring in experts to make sure you're getting valuable lessons. All right, without further ado, allow me to introduce our esteemed AI expert, Bradley Reynolds. Bradley is a recognized leader in the AI industry with a deep understanding of the transformative power of large language models, LLMs, and generative AI. As the Senior Vice President of Artificial Intelligence at Expedient, Bradley spearheads efforts to simplify the deployment of private AI for enterprises. So once again, you are in very good hands. Welcome back, Brad.
Thanks, Lauren. So today, going to give you a kind of a recap of some of the general trends in terms of AI, both from a consumer or user perspective as well as the enterprise, and touch on a couple of other aspects. So let's see. I'm going to go over kind of one of the big themes that's happening now is related to search. So both consumer search and enterprise search, but how do we use AI to kind of make sense of large mountains of data? And I'll go over kind of a couple aspects of it. We'll touch a little bit on Apple Intelligence, so Apple's AI offerings, and then a little recap on the new GPT reasoning module called GPT-01, which was formerly called Strawberry, and kind of how that's working out in the wild. But wanted to give an overview on the business side, because that's usually how we look at it at Expedient, in terms of where the market is at. So maybe where your company is at, or things that you're thinking about. So Bain and Company just did an equities analysis, or just an analysis in general on AI investment for 2025. So something that we pay attention to, because if people are investing in it, then product sets could potentially fit them. So pretty large number in terms of their survey. I think they surveyed about 400 kind of mid-sized enterprises, and there's a very large number of enterprises looking to invest in AI in 2025, the number being 85%. But more telling was the stat that 15% of those enterprises actually have a plan. So there's a big gap in between folks that have a plan, which means they've either done a lot of deliberations internally, or they've gone to a consulting company to go build that plan, and the mass of people who want to deploy it. But really, can you deploy kind of any AI system if you don't have a plan in place? So macroeconomic trend for 2025 is that 85% or the 75% or 70% delta. Those people need to develop a plan first, so that they understand what the return on investment could be with different AI deployments, so that they can decide that they want to invest, because I don't think anybody's really going to invest without a plan. So a little recap from the last time. My bar on my iPhone changed, and the bottom bar on my iPhone is kind of how I gauge what's important in the world. And I showed this to somebody at a trade show recently, and they had PTSD over the number of emails, phone calls, and text messages I'm not answering. So forgive me, but I don't answer everybody's information. But the important part here is that the menu bar changed from OpenAI, so ChatGPT #1, to ChatGPT still #1, but I've added a new one called Perplexity in. And I'm going to go into what Perplexity is, but at a high level, it's AI that's very oriented towards solving the search problem. So no longer needing as an individual to go out to the web, but Perplexity using the web as their backend and passing that through AI so that I can get answers. Pretty big, important thing that a bunch of people are trying to attack, but it's made it down to the bar. So I think it's relatively important. And the topic area here is we're grouping a lot of these technologies into what folks are calling search, whether it's consumer search or enterprise search, but really it's something more than that. We're just using search as the context for how we've been retrieving information for the past 20 years via Google, Alta Vista, Yahoo, all that type of stuff. And really what we're getting to is the point where we're getting answers. So instead of giving me a bunch of documents we have to read through and process, we're feeding that information, so the search part of it, into AI with the question. So the question, we're going to go through a bunch of them, but really what we're trying to get out of this, both from a consumer perspective and an enterprise perspective, is I want answers. And one of the nice things about AI is even if the answer that comes back isn't the answer that I think it should be, I can have a conversation with the AI, just try and drill in on, the kind of answers that I'm looking for. So give you an overview of some people trying to attack this problem. So Perplexity, that I just mentioned, very small, but relatively high valuation of 9 billion on 50 million in revenue. OpenAI, 4 billion revenue, 157 billion valuation. And the elephant in the room is Google. So, 338 billion in revenue and 2.2 trillion in valuation. And why that's important is because it shapes how these people are approaching search. So how does AI search work? You combine an AI model, so like GPT 4.0 or GPT 0.1 with the World Wide Web. This is from the consumer search perspective. When you ask a question, it goes out to the World Wide Web, pulls that information down, and sends that to the AI model with your question. So think about the web as being a reference library that none of us may need to enter anymore. Essentially, we're using a service like Perplexity as our reference librarian. So the reference librarian is going out based on what we're interested in learning about and saying, hey, out of the trillions of books out there and trillions of web pages, which are the ones that are likely to be the relevant context to answer the question? Why is that useful? It's because the web is staying up to date every minute of the day. So if I want to ask it about the Guardian's box score, or I want to ask it about something that's topical and relevant, it's able to kind of pull those books off the shelf and send it to AI. One of the limitations of AI models is that once they're trained, they're kind of set in time with their knowledge. So they're really good at reasoning and kind of picking out needles in haystacks. But if the information has happened since the time that they've been trained, they're going to give a kind of wishy-washy or kind of a generic answer as opposed to the exact answer. So the combo of using the web as the back end and AI as the front end to kind of process the information on the web is kind of a huge change in behavior. And that's why instead of using Google, I use Perplexity for any of my kind of web-related searches. But we'll give an example of how Google's trying to deal with this. And the problem with Google, I guess it's not a problem. They're making a huge amount of revenue, but where are they making revenue? They're making revenue on their kind of search result ads. And it's creating this conflict within their organization. Because if I type in an easy query of tell me about the best AI conferences in 2025, or actually any time, the first set of results are actually AI generated. So Google is doing the same thing that Perplexity is doing, where it's going through a bunch of web assets and giving me an AI overview and summary, and then also giving me a table layout of conferences that I can go to for AI. The problem with this is that none of these things generate revenue for Google. What generates revenue is the web pages that they add in that those operators pay them by the click so that you get driven to their website. So Google's kind of in this split brain personality where the consumers are demanding the answers, which is why the AI overview is at the top, but they're not making money on it. Now, I'm sure they'll figure out a way to kind of add that in there, but they're kind of they're kind of bound to their history in terms of this layout and how we're interacting with data. And you can see on the right-hand side, the typical kind of results page for Google. So this is the stuff that would be below the fold, but this is kind of the history of Google, and we all use it, kind of know how it operates. But there are better ways to go about it. So this is just an example of Perplexity. So Perplexity is free. If you haven't tried it, I would suggest trying it. For me, it's replaced Google. Now, why has it replaced Google? Google has this massive funding and massive kind of back end. Well, Perplexity is designed from the perspective of the user needs answers, me, and they don't want to go scour the web or kind of have that interface. I would like to have this reference librarian figure it out for me. So because they're able to design from the ground up with that end in mind, they're not beholden to some of the technical debt that Google is. So asking the same question in Perplexity gives me an answer that's down below the top AI conferences, but it also shows me the sources that it's gathered it from. So it's gone to a variety of web sources, put them all together as reference books, and then sent them to AI. In this case, they might be using OpenAI as the backend to kind of come up with this summary. If I want to go to a specific reference site, it's kind of easily accessible there at the top. So I'm able to get the answers I want. And then if I need to go to reference material, I can, as opposed to having to go to the reference material first and kind of intuit what is good. The other nice thing is that it can average information. So if it looks at 5, 6 different sources, what is it doing? It's downloading those web pages and then taking each of those as a reference book and sending it to AI and saying, hey, with this corpus of 5 different sites and all this information, tell me what's there. So things that it'll find that you wouldn't find individually would be like the commonalities. So if all of the reference sites reference the AI Summit in London, it will know that that is one of the important ones. And then some of the oddities, the ones that only one site mentions, might be ranked lower or not even make the list at all. So it's essentially doing the correlation and value judgment on what are the best kind of AI conferences. But we can also ask it aspects about itself. So one question that I wanted to ask is, how does it determine the sourcing? Because if you have garbage sources, you're going to get garbage information out of it. And I didn't really get the definitive answer on it, but kind of some of the magic and secret sauce of what Perplexity is how to validate those sources. So if you're getting the results from like a search engine results page from like the Bing API, are those all good, or are they mostly just like lead gen sites that are ranked because they're good at SEO, but they don't necessarily have the content that I want? So I wasn't able to exactly figure that out, but I've been using it and I found the results to be relatively valuable. Another aspect that I'm using, so this was actually one of the last aspects I was using Google for, which is, hey, I need to buy X, a water filter, and Google would have the listing of the sites that would be what are the best kind of water filters. And then you kind of go through different top 10 guides and Wirecutter and all of that to figure out the answer. Well, I don't need to do that anymore. So it's able to go out and digest from all of those sites and then be able to give me a concise summary of kind of the correlation of all of that data. And so for me, on the buying side as a consumer, I'm using Perplexity to try and figure out the information that I need. So what'll come back is all the way down to relevant products. So it's like cutting the aspect of me needing to go to those separate sites out and then giving me an interface where I can just be like, yeah, I get how you've evaluated this. I see what the pluses and minuses are. I'm going to go visit Best Buy or Amazon. And as of right now, Perplexity is not making money on this. These aren't like affiliate links. These aren't ads that Brita and APEC have paid for. But you can see at some point in the future, that's going to be something that they're interested in doing.
Hey,
So
Brad.
I'm seeing some questions. Is that what you're going to say?
It is indeed. They are
Okay, cool.
Perplexity related. So
Yeah.
the first question is, Andy asked, other than the cutoff date, what is the delta in the answer provided by Perplexity versus ChatGPT for a given question? And if you're still using ChatGPT, why?
Yeah, so great question. So I think the current OpenAI models have been trained through maybe the early part of 2024. So there'll be like a 6-month delta, 8-month delta in terms of new. But when Perplexity has been out for, I think, maybe a year, What ChatGPT, and I think I cover it, they've added web search into their system. I don't know if it's in the free version. I only use the paid version. But they have a kind of version of the same thing where it goes out to multiple sources, digests the information. The kind of difference as I see that. So first of all, OpenAI is super well funded. If Perplexity does it, they can build it into their system, but they do a lot of other things. And so I use OpenAI as kind of my general knowledge aspect when I don't necessarily need to search the web. Like, hey, take these logs and digest it, or say kind of proprietary information. And so that's what I use it for. But it also does a bunch of other things. It has the voice mode where you can talk to it and get the answers and actually have a conversation with it. It has a bunch of kind of other feature sets that Perplexity doesn't have. So I think about it as Perplexity is kind of like single shot focus on making the web or current information on the web easy for you to get an answer from. And so outside of that, that's where I use either our own proprietary internal tool if I'm doing work stuff, or if I'm just doing personal stuff, I use ChatGPT for that. And then I see Skylar asked a couple questions about Perplexity being better at providing references. Yeah, it's because it's specifically designed for web, all of the kind of answers and how it kind of correlates it together are going to be visually and more consumably easier than what ChatGPT has. But ChatGPT is kind of catching up on that. Their thing is they're building a lot of different systems. So the web aspect isn't going to be their primary focus. And so I think Perplexity is probably going to be a good focus. And then Kim asks about Copilot. So kind of Perplexity and OpenAI on one side, and then Copilot on another side in terms of how people are looking at it. So Copilot's advantage is it's embedded into Microsoft applications. And Perplexity and ChatGPT's advantage is it's kind of like a universal system, more similar to like Google search in all intents and purposes. And Copilot's advantage is that if you're in PowerPoint, you can ask it questions and do stuff and have it like work on the PowerPoint. But the kind of single interface that can suck in a whole bunch of data and suck in the web, that's not really Copilot's thing. It's kind of AI enabling Microsoft applications. So I see them as being maybe complements. I've personally had Copilot for 6 months. I found it to be extremely well marketed and extremely underwhelming in terms of what it can do for me. I mean, I live in PowerPoint half the time, and I've not used it to do much in PowerPoint. I've actually used ChatGPT or our internal tool to kind of generate things like, hey, write me, what are the key points I should probably cover in the State of AI presentation for Jumpstart? Yeah, and Bing itself is using Copilot, the Bing search is kind of a Copilot thing. The other issue that I have with the Copilot or the Microsoft stuff is it makes an opinion about AI models. So because of the partnership between OpenAI and Microsoft, you're going to use OpenAI's models, but there's other models that are out there like Google's Gemini, the the Anthropic models like Claude, Sonnet, and all that type of stuff that are actually superior to OpenAI in certain aspects, like maybe for coding aspects or email writing aspects, image generation aspects. And so when you think about it, like having an opinion where you have to use a specific model is, I think, a limiting thing. And so I don't use Copilot. Well, I don't use Copilot because I don't really like their interface, but I get long-term why having AI embedded inside of the Microsoft suite would be valuable for organizations. And Kim asks in terms why use paid versions. The paid versions will give you access to the better models, and the free versions often give you, at least it used to be, like you could only get access to the top tier model at OpenAI if you use the paid version, and you get like 3.5 if you use the free version. There's a huge difference in terms of quality of output. So that's one piece. The other piece is on the free versions of these, and I only know OpenAI, I don't know the other ones. They're allowed to use your data to train the model. So for instance, if you have an employee that's using the free version and they upload proprietary corporate information into it, then it's in OpenAI. And anybody else that asks the OpenAI model with the training could now get your personal corporate information out. So paid versions will say, hey, we're not going to train on any information. So from a corporation perspective, huge thing. From a consumer's perspective, may or may not matter if you think that I don't care if they train on it. I just want kind of a free version. Perplexity, I haven't looked at. I don't use it for any business oriented stuff, so I don't have that concern. It is a free version. They do have a paid version. I don't know if they're training off of the data or not. And then John asked the question about what about use of POE? Oh, the PO aggregator. So love the concept in terms of PO of aggregating multiple AIs. And we actually, for our own proprietary tool at Expedient, we have like OpenAI, Azure OpenAI, HIPAA compliant, Anthropic, Gemini, for the same reason as you're going to use the right tool for the right job. You may not know what the right tool is, but like Google Gemini is great for really large documents. And Anthropics is great for writing emails, and ChatGPT is more of like the utility or OpenAI is the utility infielder. So I like the concept of PO and the ability to kind of choose based on the thing that you're trying to do. So I think that's a great. I think PO and similar systems are I think better than just using one individual. And the problem with it is that you'll have PO's user interface. So PO will use the backend APIs of these systems, but as ChatGPT builds a really beautiful user interface, or as we see with Perplexity, all this nice bells and whistles around making search easy for you, that won't necessarily translate into the PO system because PO is building their own user interface that may be inferior to Perplexity on web search. So that's kind of the trade-off piece. So go kind of back to, thanks for all the questions, and keep them coming. I'll try and hit on as many as I possibly can. Just to give you an idea of kind of what the underlying sources of all of this, so you can go check out, really for me, it's, do you believe the sources that they're pulling in? And so that's, kind of a validation step. And so, my question long-term, yeah, Kim, you asked the question, is there one interface that allows you to access all the various AIs in one place? Something like PO that was previously mentioned I forget what the URL is, but you can search for PO, POE, and AI, and it's one of those that you get an account there. I think it's probably paid, but maybe they have a free version. And then that gives you the ability to choose which AI model you want. I think it even has the ability to run a query against multiple AI models at the same time to kind of see what gives you the best. So if you're saying, hey, I want to type out a prospecting email to person X, and here's their company, and here's what they're interested in, and you send that off to OpenAI and Anthropic, and then you kind of can choose what comes back. So you can do it individually, I know, but I think it has the ability to touch multiple at the same time. And then I'm interested for the perplexities, like how are they going to make money? Yeah, there you go. PO is the free version. But what does free get you? Do they use your data? It's kind of like things that you may need to investigate, especially if you're using it for business purposes. So I appreciate that piece. So I want to know kind of how these folks are going to make money long term, because it's what do they have subscriptions? Me personally, if whether it's YouTube TV or whatever, I'm like, I'm going to pay the money to not see ads. So that's worth something for me, but I know they have to figure out how to monetize, and maybe they have kind of combinations of both of those things in long term. But another interesting thing that like Perplexity has is on the left side, you'll see related things. So basically, as it answers it, at the bottom of the answer, it'll have kind of other paths that you can go down, and it's just point and click. So, I want to, if one of these strikes your fancy, you just click on the plus and it submits that query, and then you continue. So you can have this kind of feedback loop and interaction where you're like learning more and more and kind of drilling down, maybe in the same way that we used to use the web, where we were using the web to kind of be like, oh, I start to go down this rabbit hole of research and kind of eventually get to my information. Perplexity is looking to automate a lot of that stuff. So that's consumer search. And the web's a great resource. I don't really want to use the web anymore, but I want to use the intel inside of the web. And whether it's Google, Bing, OpenAI, Perplexity, various people are trying to figure that out. But there's this other side of the coin, which is, well, what about if I'm in a business and I have my business data? It's not on the web, it's in Salesforce, it's SharePoint, and it's in emails, and it's in OneDrive. How do I enable that data kind of in the same way that Perplexity enables web data so that my users and applications can go and search for it. So the term that Gardner would use is enterprise search, but really it should be enterprise answers and frankly, conversations with data. So this is, in terms of businesses, a huge push for 2025. So when we look at the different proofs of concept and early clients that we're turning up, enterprise data and hooking that into AI is a huge kind of push for kind of the coming year. So what is the concept? It's pretty much what we explained with Perplexity, which is connecting and pulling in data. So what Perplexity uses the web, enterprise search would use something like pulling it in from SharePoint or internal document store. And then once you pull those reference library books off the shelf, then you're going to take them and give them as context and submit it to AI. So the person asks the question, hey, I'll show you a couple of them in a bit. What's the promo on X from our marketing store? It pulls the detail of what that promo is, but instead of just giving you, hey, here's the document, that would just be pure search. It sends that document to AI and says, well, they asked the question, what's the basics of the promo? Take this 20-page document and answer it for them. So that's a super powerful thing, relatively easy to explain, somewhat technically difficult to implement, but where I see kind of most of the business stuff going. So it really gets powerful when you're able to have multiple sources of enterprise data. So if you look at something simple, this is actually not very simple. I forgot my slide order. But if you think about it, it's like one thing to pull in a SharePoint, but it's another thing to pull in a SharePoint, email systems, stuff from Salesforce, stuff from your ERP, and pull that into a format called a vector store so that you can search across them. So instead of it being a bunch of silos of data, that user query can kind of span all of that data and pick out the reference material, like the library books that are necessary to answer the question. And as you start adding more and more data into an AI-ready system, the span of the question in terms of the data as access to starts to get very large. And so pulling the needle out of the haystack becomes, without AI, a very difficult problem. With AI and AI-ready storage starts to become a tractable problem that we've been looking to solve for a long time. It's a very detailed slide that's expedient related, but it's more a visual on the left-hand side of how it kind of functions inside of an enterprise. So the thing that I spoke about was on the left side, the kind of data store. And you also will have a connector archive that is able to pull data from those multiple sources. I'm going to pause here because Don asked a question. So won't Microsoft have a big hand up on enterprise search? So this is, again, one of those philosophic things. So Microsoft's good at having enterprise applications. So they have like SharePoint, and then they have all the different Office 365 stuff. But what they don't have is access to anything outside of the Microsoft suite. They're not very good at that. In fact, they don't want you to use anything outside of Microsoft. They want to build all the incentives to keep everything on Microsoft. But actually interacting with Microsoft at technical scale, we're talking of terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of information, you start to deal with the rigidity of a large corporation. So a lot of this is about getting data in and being very flexible. And data can be in Microsoft competitors. It could be in AWS. It could be in Salesforce. Microsoft's not going to have great connectors and build to things that are outside of their ecosystem. They don't value the data the most. They value the Microsoft ecosystem the most. So if you want to go all in on Microsoft and to only keep your data there, they'll build decent tooling around. The current tooling's kind of weak, but they have lots of resources to kind of build it out. So it kind of comes down to where is your data. And if you're cool with it all living inside the Microsoft ecosystem, I'm sure there'll be tooling that comes out from them that makes it pretty easy to use. If your data exists kind of in a heterogeneous fashion over lots of different locations and SaaS providers, probably better to Microsoft itself will be limiting. It will really kind of only give you the Microsoft, purview. Just basic stuff on enterprise search. You pull stuff in from data sources into a data store. you have some sort of PII kind of filtering, and you may be using a private model, but you may be sending that data out to public models. So the left side of it is really about collecting the library books and indexing them so that you can pull the right ones off the shelf. And the right side is, okay, and where do you ship that off to as reference material? Because we want to reduce the hallucinations. We want to essentially use those library books as grounding so that we can make the correct answers. Just to give you an example of what we use to pull in, we use a system called Elastic as our data store, and it has a bunch of connectors. You can see kind of the greatest hits pulling stuff out of Confluence or SharePoint and all of that. That's the part that kind of nightly updates our data store to say, hey, what's current in terms of our databases? So you need to have a connector infrastructure as well as a data store infrastructure in addition to the AI part to kind of make the enterprise search. So half of enterprise search is the data, half of enterprise search is what AI models are you going to send it to. So just to give you an example of what it looks inside of our interface, we have two document stores that we have indexed for, this is just internal expedient use. So we have our technical documents archive, which is using out of Confluence about 50,000 documents. And then internal marketing documents, we out of a system called Echo that we wrote a custom connector for. And that is about 1,200 documents. Technical document archive, how do we answer most customer problems? Internal marketing docs, more like sales and marketing focused. So if we're looking to, for a sales rep to figure out what's going on with a certain promo or a product, you have those document stores. But the power of enterprise search at scale becomes as you start adding more document stores. So like we can add our HR document store that tells you all the policies and health care plans and all that type of stuff. That would just be another checkbox. So as a user asks a question, if you have multiple data stores loaded and you have them all checked or selected, that question could span everything. They don't need to know, hey, does that sit in the HR document archive? I've asked the question, do we get Veterans Day off? It is able to kind of span indexes to do like some sort of an aggregated search. So starts to get powerful at scale. It's still powerful even if you have one data source connected. So give you an example of when the data source is connected. So we have a 6-month free AI promo for our clients where it's like, hey, you want to get on board, we're not going to charge you for, kind of per seat or anything. We'll give you 6 months for free. Great. We launched that like 2 weeks ago. And marketing came up with a bunch of documents and things that you can send out to a client, all that type of stuff. But it was in a system called Echo, and Echo had a user interface from a third-party provider that you had to log into, and then you had to like hopefully type the right search information in the box and use their search interface to find it. And what the reality of the situation is that was causing sales reps not to be able to get the information they want because it was a cumbersome system. And so we released the promo. The documents are in Echo about what the promo is, all the details, what you can send out to a client, but a sales rep would have a hard time getting to it, even if we told them 10 times. Well, now we load Echo into the AI-ready data store, and one of those selectors was Expedient Internal Marketing Docs Echo. If you have that selector on and ask the question, it pulls it out of the archive and then answers the question. But in addition to answering the question, based on a summary of the library books they pulled out, you have a link to the actual source information. So the source information being, hey, here's how you go and register for your 6-month free trial, but also here's the PDF that we came out with that you can download because you literally can click on it. It's now in your box. Now you can send it out to your client. The sales rep no longer needs to go into that third-party ecosystem, the ECHO system. They can just use the AI interface and get their answers directly. So that's kind of the power of enterprise search. Kind of a couple, and then Andy had a question. Let's see. Is there cost-effective enterprise search platforms that start up that has an easy API interface for connecting our data? There's a variety of people trying it. I don't know if it's cost-effective. Like cost-effective meaning like you can get in super cheap. What some folks will do at a startup phase is they'll go buy, there's kind of 3 components you need to have. So one is the getting the data in component. And you might say, hey, we need that to be, we have 30 different data sources. We need a whole ETL connector thing. If you have just like one data source and you want to just write manual process to go pull that out, You don't need the connector part. That's more for, as we're building a product that's important. If you're doing a small case, you don't need that. You would need a vector store. So something to take that data and turn it into the mathematical format that AI needs to be able to kind of pull the library books off the shelf. People like us do it. People like Pinecone do it. There's free ones called Chroma, Weaviate. There's options there. And so you can either buy a SaaS service from somebody like Pinecone or deploy it yourself. And then on the other side, you have API connections into OpenAI, as like maybe a standard. So you can do a quick and dirty with like Chroma DB and OpenAI API to get you somewhere. But as you kind of start scaling that out, that's where connector infrastructure comes in. That's where kind of the managed enterprise search is important. And I wouldn't say it's cost effective, the wrong word. It's not cheap. Those components are each individually expensive, and kind of putting them together is kind of expensive. So I know some people that are just doing business as just enterprise search, but like your kind of get-in rate might be $3,000 a month, which as a startup, you're like, I could spend my $3,000 a month in a variety of other places. But maybe as I scale it out and I can justify it, then maybe some of that enterprise search makes sense. So I'll give you a couple examples from like how our employees are using enterprise search. Typical sales example. You got like a 300 question RFP. A lot of the answers are answers that we answer for every RFP. Some of them are nuanced, but this is what you get. You get a bunch of questions from a prospect. So what do? Without the enterprise search aspect, you could put the information to AI and says like, how many co-location facilities does Expedient have? Well, because ChatGPT or OpenAI doesn't have access to that enterprise information, it's going to like try and find things that it's done from when they trained it on the web. But the data that's out there isn't necessarily accurate. And it's also muddied by all of the other trillions of pieces of information that they've gathered. And so it's going to give you a generic answer because it's not grounded to like things that are relevant to our company. But if you turn on the internal marketing docs and tech docs, then you ask the same question, cool, it's going to give me stuff because it's, the actual information from my company, because it's pulled that book off the shelf, which has talked about it, and then it summarizes it for me. But at the bottom, you can see the original document. So if I'm creating a RFP response, which is likely going to be a PowerPoint or a Word doc, it shows me what it pulled off the shelf to kind of answer that question. And you can pull multiple library books, but this is the one that was featured the most prominently. So if I'm creating a slide deck for a client, I'm like, well, I could answer it in text, but why don't I just copy and paste this PDF graphic or whatever directly into my presentation? And then from a sales rep perspective, you can go back and say, hey, for all these questions, I can ask them line by line. Cool. But if you end up doing this process over and over again, like you're doing it pretty frequently in your business, you can easily write like a 10-line program. One side of it's pull this RFP document in, and then one by one, submit each of these questions to AI by using the internal marketing docs endpoint and get all 150 of those answers, and then send that to a human to review. So there's the ability to do things manually through the interface, and then additionally to automate that if you think you're doing it time and time again, because going tediously through 180 questions is slow. But if you didn't have AI and enterprise search, it would be almost a non-starter because there's a lot of work that would have to do to answer that. You could do a first blush on all 180 questions within maybe 30 minutes, 45 minutes, something like that, if you're doing it manually. And then if you had a program to do it, the program would come back in like 5 minutes. Another use case in terms of like client support. So this is more of like adding in the Confluence stuff, so our standard operating procedures. So if you ask AI without any type of enterprise search, how do I install a Cohesity backup agent for CentOS 7? It will give you a generic answer of how to do that. If you turn it on and ask the same question, it would give you your company's information, so like the Expedient information. And at the bottom would have a link to here's the actual standard operating procedure. Now, this standard operating procedure is like 15 pages of different stuff in terms of service delivery. I only really care about the Cohesity aspect of it. So it's able to take the large standard operating procedure document, send it to AI with the question of tell me about the Cohesity install, and pull just that section out and give me my answer. So, but if I need reference material, it's not giving me enough context, I can pop into that. So 2 use cases. This one much more efficient for customer service rep, and likely getting them to the answer they need or pulling the needle out of the haystack a lot quicker. Move over from enterprise search to a couple of things in terms of Apple Intelligence. So from maybe not a business perspective, but from a consumer perspective, I'm paying a lot of attention to what Apple's doing. First of all, I'm completely bought into the Apple cult and the Apple ecosystem. So I know that as these things come out, they're starting to be enabled on my various devices. So I'm interested to see. Also, Apple has taken the tack of being very kind of privacy and security focused, where maybe some of the other AI providers don't have that as the first thought. Their thought is to scale and to build a business. Apple already has maybe the most valuable business in the world, but a very large business. And so it'd be interesting to see how they go about implementing this thing that they call Apple Intelligence in devices. And they're going to be implementing it across a bunch of different devices. It may already be released. I'm not kind of using it because I think you have to be like for an iPhone 15 or greater, to 16. And there's just certain versions of like the kind of iPads and Mac that you need to have to be able to run it. And why is that? It's because Apple's taking an interesting tack in terms of the technology. They are embedding AI models on the devices, as well as when the thing that you're asking becomes too complex, they have the ability to kind of send that question out to the cloud using OpenAI as a backend. So they're going to try and, from a security, privacy, performance aspect, try and use the locally hosted models in AI to solve problems and answer questions, and then kind of punt to the cloud when something's maybe too complex for the local processing, which is why the version of the hardware matters, because they have specific dedicated chips to be able to run models locally, both in terms of the GPU and kind of memory access. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out. But there's one example that they showed is, hey, you're drawing things on your iPad and you kind of coming up with a general idea, but you want to turn your rough sketch into an actual visualization of what you're doing. So very creative thing. Obviously, Apple's always been super creative oriented. You're able to circle that on the left and say, I want a rendering of this, and this is what kind of comes out of it. And I don't know whether they process this on the iPad's direct hardware or they send this out to like OpenAI or one of their AI backends. But the notion that you can start to take something from a very rough format and formalize it is, I think, near and dear to Apple's heart. So as we interact with Apple devices across their ecosystem, little pockets of this will start to get built in. And then I think whether it's Siri or Alexa, they kind of aren't great. They're good at turning voice to text and doing some basic things, but they're not great at like free-form conversations. And so the mega upgrade for Siri is kind of turning Siri from a basic question answerer to more of a conversationalist, where you could OpenAI is the same thing, where you can actually just have OpenAI voice and you just have a conversation with the AI. Feels like a human-to-human conversation. I'm sure Apple's going to kill it with Siri in the same aspect, and asking Siri even further to start doing things for you, as opposed to just like having a conversation about some piece of information. That's all I had on Apple, but just we'll be paying attention to it. In terms of Strawberry, so talked a decent amount about this on the last one, but OpenAI's released more of an analysis model. So a model that doesn't just answer the question, but actually breaks down your question into steps and uses analysis and kind of chain of thought reasoning to come out with an answer. Haven't started using this at scale because I haven't gotten access to it via the API, but have used it a bit in terms of the ChatGPT interface. So again, to one of the earlier questions, what does OpenAI have that other people don't have? It's this reasoning model. And just as a point of reference, somebody asked about this on the last conversation, IQ score of these various models. So you can see the models that are ranked here, and that thing that we call Strawberry, which they call GPT-01, is getting to a very high level on IQ tests. And this site that I got this from, actually, like every week they continually test whatever models are out there, like the highest end models, with a set of IQ tests. some of them are like visual tests where it's like, rearrange this or find the pattern here, not just like linguistic tests. So, that kind of getting over the bell curve of average intelligence being 100 to something that's 120 IQ, that's pretty sophisticated. So if you think about if you had a 120 IQ person in your organization, what they would be able to solve. I'm not saying that OpenAI's O1 would be able to do that, but it's hitting kind of the test marks. And other people will use metrics like who can pass the LSAT or, what score do they get on it. But, kind of the trend. And then so this one was a couple of months ago for my last presentation. And the current one, as of like yesterday, as of yesterday, basically the same. So maybe a slight increase in O1. Why is that? Because they're constantly tuning O1 to get better based on user feedback. It's relatively new. So it's probably never going to get to 160, but it might inch up a bit. And then we see that other models are also being tuned to give answers better. And so that's kind of like how some of these things are being architected. So pretty broad summary in terms of search, both for the consumer and the enterprise. And then as well as just a quick touch on kind of where Apple's going and as something to pay attention to, especially if you're an Apple user, and then a little recap on Strawberry. But, kind of the ender of all of this is whatever we're using now, it's the worst and most expensive. So I'm super excited and optimistic about, the kind of the next update and where things are going to go and what comes out after O1 and all that type of stuff, as well as the Apple ecosystem. So thanks for your time. Open it up to kind of any verbal or if anybody has any additional Q&A questions, happy to answer.
Thanks so much, Brad. You folks are welcome to raise your hand if you'd like to vocalize your question to Brad. You're also welcome to put any final questions in the Q&A module. You're getting
Thanks,
compliments.
Right on.
It's a lot to absorb. But we do have a question. Jeff, I'm going to, no, Jeff. All right, Jeff, I'm going to allow you to talk. Give me 1 second and go ahead and unmute yourself.
Just wanted to say thank you. Just getting privy to all this information and seeing where it's almost like we're trend forecasting. We're able to see where the world is going and able to at least make the choice to jump on, because if we don't, it's almost like not having a website in the early 90s or the late 90s. You're going to be left behind without it. So I appreciate just the input. I came a little bit late, but still just an amazing amount of information, especially with us iOS users. We appreciate you. And that's pretty much it. I just wanted to tell you thank you for sharing the information and have an amazing day.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it. We got a couple questions in the Q&A. So Skylar asked, beyond webinars, what's your favorite means of staying up to date? So it's kind of two things for me. One, I go to work every day, so I have to drive. So having a podcast or two, and there's two that I listen to. One's called Hard Fork, HARDFORK. It's done by the New York Times, and it's not necessarily 100% AI, but just because it's a hot topic, they talk about that a lot. But they're two journalists, so they're thinking about it more in terms of what's the story or what's the why, as opposed to the technical stuff. And then there's a technical podcast called Last Week in AI, so it's once a week. That's the one that's going to talk about all the technical details that probably most people don't care about. So I think Hard Fork's a really good one if you want to get your toe in the water and stay abreast of the kind of large trends, as opposed to having to get into the details. So that's the podcast side. Additionally, there's a bunch of newsletters. We actually publish one too at crawlwalkrun.ai, but there's a variety of newsletter sources that'll do like a daily inbox digest. Ours happens to be a weekly digest, but I think I subscribe to maybe like 6 or 7 of them, like the Neuron and TLDR, and there's a variety of them that they're all hosted through Beehive. But they come in my inbox every morning, and then so you get like kind of like reading the paper in the morning. You get like 5 or 10 little things, and each of them is like, here's 5 points to think about with AI. Here's what we're seeing out there. So I can't read them all every day, but that's how I kind of understand what's trending or what's hot. So that's what we use. Brad asks, don't use Perplexity for business. So what do I primarily use? Or better yet, which platform do you recommend for small businesses? So we have our own internal system that's actually a product that has our own enterprise data in it. So I'll use the Expedient stuff for my day-to-day. But like if an enterprise bought that, it's a somewhat expensive system. And then that's my business one because it's our data, and I don't want that kind of leaking outside. And then I'll use ChatGPT on the other side or Perplexity for when I have, I want to buy a water filter type stuff. If you don't have a system like ours, if you do the paid version of ChatGPT, the $20 a month one, it will not train off of your data. So you don't worry like, hey, I uploaded this spreadsheet or this Word document or this customer contract. It won't turn into something that is somebody else can find. So probably that would be, if we didn't have a tool ourselves, that's probably what I would use. We have other clients that use Copilot a bit, but I think their experience has been pretty underwhelming with Copilot, whereas the experience with ChatGPT Enterprise is, positive, and it's, $20 a month. It's decent. And then Perplexity for web stuff. What's their best practice for companies create a transparency statement about how they employ AI in their services or deliverables? Haven't thought about that. Have thought about the AI use policy, in terms of like how you use it internally. But usually when it comes up to transparency statements, like maybe, I guess I would probably ask Perplexity is, hey, what are some good points to cover in a transparency statement, and provide me references so that you can look at if somebody else has written that. Like, for instance, if you're a marketing agency and you're like, well, we use AI to generate a bunch of this content, but we have humans edited at the end, probably want to be clear about that. But my guess is other people have built these transparency statements or terms and conditions or whatever you want to say that you can use as reference points. So maybe use Perplexity to tell you kind of what's out there and what are the important points of a good transparency statement in terms of deliverables. And then you can go to the reference points and be like, yeah, you know what, that one's good. I want to do something very similar in language to that. And either you could say, hey, take this statement, send it, probably not to Perplexity, but maybe OpenAI, and say, do this the way that I want it, talking about these things that my customers would find relevant. And then, OpenAI can kind of rewrite it. And now you have a transparency statement. Now, that's not as good as something a lawyer wrote, but it's also not as expensive as something a lawyer wrote. So you can kind of make your decision about whether you want to use an edited OpenAI output to come with a transparency statement, or, you want to kind of maybe get that information that you've gathered to an attorney to build it out for you.
Any other questions? You've got Brad in the hot seat. Okay, we'll assume you answered all of their burning questions about AI. Brad, thank you so much for coming back and visiting us again and giving us all of your wisdom and experiences in AI up to date. A couple of notes for everybody on the call. Next State of AI webinar will be in 2025. We will add that to our website as soon as possible, and I'm sure Brad will have lots of new gems for you then. Our next general business webinar is called The Franchise Model and will be held next Wednesday, the 20th at noon, so we hope to see you all there virtually. Thank you again. Thank you so much again to Brad, and I hope you all have a wonderful week.